She used to bring him coffee at midnight, whispering, "Don't give up, Hudson, you'll make it someday." But years later, when she needed him most, he handed her divorce papers instead. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft hum of oxygen machines and the slow drip of the IV line. Rain tapped gently against the window, blurring the city lights beyond. A woman lay on the bed, weak and pale. Her name was Lainey Luca, a gentle soul known for her kindness and unwavering faith in people. She had stood beside her husband through his hardest years, supporting him when he had nothing but ambition and a dream. But now, the same man who once called her his reason for breathing was the one who had left her to face death alone. Hey there, welcome back to Life Real Channel. Quick favor before we begin. If you haven't liked and subscribed yet, do it right now. Like, and tell us where you are watching from. It takes just a few seconds, and it helps us out tremendously. Plus, you'll be the first to know when we drop new videos. Now, let's jump right deep into today's content. Lainey's eyes were half open. Her body was thin, her hands trembling each time she tried to lift the glass of water from her bedside table. The nurse adjusted her oxygen tube gently. "You need to rest, Mrs. Luca," she said softly. Lainey nodded faintly, but sleep wouldn't come. Her heart was too heavy. For 3 months, she had been in that same hospital room. Not a single call from Hudson, not one visit. Her phone sat silent on the bedside table, screen dark, mocking her with its emptiness. Hudson Luca, her husband of 8 years, the man whose empire she had helped build with midnight encouragement and unwavering belief, had disappeared the moment her illness began. When the doctors asked about insurance coverage, Hudson's assistant had answered coldly, "Mr. Luca has initiated divorce proceedings. Handle billing through her personal accounts." The hospital accountant sighed each time he opened Lainey's file. "Your husband hasn't contributed anything," he said carefully. "We've been using your insurance, but it's running out fast." Lainey wanted to speak, but her voice cracked. Did he say anything?" The accountant looked at her sadly. "No, ma'am, but his lawyer came last week. He said the divorce papers have been filed. Your husband is already engaged to someone else." Lainey's chest tightened. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She turned her face to the wall, remembering how she had trusted him, how she had worked 2 jobs to help him secure his first property deal, how she had gone without so he could dress for investor meetings, how she had signed documents he'd asked her to, just for tax purposes, baby, never imagining he'd one day use those same papers to erase her from his life. She remembered the nights she'd brought him coffee at midnight, finding him hunched over blueprints and loan applications in their tiny apartment. His eyes would be bloodshot, his shoulders tense with worry. "I don't know if I can do this, Lainey," he'd whisper. And she would set the coffee down, wrap her arms around him from behind and say, "You will. I believe in you, Hudson. Don't give up. You'll make it someday." He would kiss her hands and promise, "When I make it, you'll have everything. I'll give you the world." Now, as she lay dying in a sterile hospital room, she realized his promise had been as empty as the chair beside her bed. Meanwhile, across town, laughter filled a luxurious penthouse restaurant. Hudson Lucas sat at a private table, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city. He looked powerful, confident, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than Lainey's monthly medical bills. Beside him sat Nora, young, stunning, draped in designer silk and diamonds that caught the candlelight with every movement. "To new beginnings," Hudson said, raising his champagne glass. Nora clinked hers against his, her smile sharp and perfectly painted, and to leaving dead weight behind. His business partners laughed. The flash of a photographer's camera captured the moment the city's newest power couple sealing a multi-million-dollar deal. Hudson's phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up briefly. "Lainey's condition is worsening. Please come. St. Mary's Hospital." Hudson glanced at it, his jaw tightened for just a second. Then he silenced the notification and slid the phone face down onto the white linen tablecloth. "Another glass," he said smoothly, signaling the waiter. Nora leaned closer, her perfume expensive and intoxicating. She whispered in his ear, "You made the right choice, Hudson. Sick wives don't build empires, strong women do." He smiled, but something in his chest felt cold. A flicker of memory Lainey's face when he'd placed the divorce papers on her hospital blanket 2 months earlier, her trembling hands, her tears falling onto the signature line. Hudson, please, I'll get better, just give me time. I can't do this anymore, Lainey. I need peace. You understand, don't you? He pushed the memory away and raised his glass again. To peace, he said. To freedom, Nora corrected, her eyes glinting. The table erupted in laughter, and champagne bubbles sparkled under crystal chandeliers. Back at the hospital, Lainey stared weakly at the rain-streaked window. The room felt smaller at night, lonelier. The machines beeped their monotonous rhythm, counting down moments she wasn't sure she had left. On the bedside table, next to her silent phone, sat a framed photograph her wedding day. Hudson in a modest suit they'd rented. Lainey in a simple white dress from a consignment shop. Both of them laughing, eyes bright with hope. She picked up the frame with shaking hands, her thumb tracing Hudson's face through the glass. So this is how love ends, she whispered to herself. When you're useful, they cherish you. When you fall, they forget your name. The night nurse, Grace, stood quietly by the door. She had seen many heartbreaking cases in her 15 years at St. Mary's, but Lainey's story broke her heart in a way she couldn't explain. This wasn't just illness, it was abandonment, betrayal of the deepest kind. Grace had witnessed the day Hudson came to make Lainey sign the divorce papers. She'd seen the way he wouldn't meet his wife's eyes. The way he'd left the room the moment Lainey's shaking hand finished signing, as if her sickness might be contagious. Don't cry, Mrs. Luca, Grace said softly, entering the room and adjusting Lainey's blanket. God is not asleep. He sees everything. Lainey nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. If I survive this, she said, each word costing her strength, I will never let anyone throw me away again. Grace squeezed her hand gently, feeling how cold and fragile it was. Deep inside, she prayed this fragile woman would somehow find the strength to keep that promise. Outside, thunder rumbled. Rain fell harder against the window, washing down in sheets that distorted the city lights into blurred streaks of color. The next morning, Hudson sat in his downtown office, a glass and steel tower that screamed success. His secretary brought him espresso in a fine china cup. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread beneath him like a kingdom he'd conquered. His phone rang his lawyer. Hudson, I have news about the divorce finalization. Good, what do I need to sign? The lawyer paused. Actually, there's something unusual. Your ex-wife refused alimony. Hudson's hand stopped halfway to his espresso cup. What? She said, and I quote, I don't want his money. I just want peace. Hudson sat back in his leather chair, a smirk forming on his lips. Peace is expensive. There's one more thing, the lawyer continued. Some of your assets were registered under both names. Properties, licenses, the main government construction permits. I need to confirm, do you want to proceed with a full transfer? Hudson waved his hand dismissively, even though the lawyer couldn't see him. She's too weak to fight anything. Process everything. I want this finished. Understood. I'll have the papers ready by Friday. Hudson hung up and sipped his espresso, staring out at the skyline. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that he should feel something, guilt, perhaps, or sadness. But he felt nothing except relief. Peace, he thought. Finally, peace. But what Hudson didn't know was that peace would soon cost him everything he had. What he didn't know was that the woman dying in that hospital bed held legal claim to the very foundation of his empire. What he didn't know was that in a small-town hospital 300 miles away, a compassionate doctor named Ellis was helping Lainey discover not just her health but her power. And what he couldn't possibly imagine was that one day soon, he would stand before her, not as the man who left her broken, but as the man begging for mercy she had every right to deny. The rain continued to fall. In the hospital, Lainey closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. In the penthouse office, Hudson signed another contract, oblivious to the storm that was coming. Fate was about to teach them both a lesson about the true cost of betrayal. 6 weeks later, the city had fallen in love with Hudson and Nora Luca. Business Insider featured them on the cover with the headline, Power Couple, How the Lucas Are Redefining Luxury Real Estate. In the photograph, Hudson stood in a charcoal suit, his arm around Nora's waist. She wore crimson, her smile dazzling, her diamond earrings catching the studio lights like tiny stars. Hudson kept a copy of the magazine on his desk. Sometimes when he was alone, he'd look at it and feel something he hadn't felt in years. Vindication. This was what success looked like. Not struggling in a cramped apartment with a wife who didn't understand that ambition required sacrifice. This was power, recognition, respect. His phone buzzed constantly with congratulations. Former colleagues who'd ignored him during his early years now wanted lunch meetings. Investors who'd once turned him down were suddenly interested in his projects. "You've arrived, Hudson," his business partner Marcus said during a meeting. "5 years ago, you were begging for loans. Now, people are begging to work with you." Hudson smiled, but inside, he felt hollow. He pushed the feeling away. Success always came with a price. That evening, Hudson and Nora attended a charity gala at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. Cameras flashed as they walked the red carpet. Nora moved like she'd been born for this, graceful, confident, her hand resting possessively on Hudson's arm. "Mr. Luca, over here," a reporter called. "How does it feel to be named Developer of the Year?" Hudson smiled smoothly. "It feels like the beginning, not the end." "And Mrs. Luca, what's your secret to balancing business and marriage?" Nora's laugh was musical. "Choose a partner who matches your ambition, not someone who holds you back." The words stung Hudson more than he expected. He thought of Lainey, who'd never held him back. She'd worked 2 jobs to support his dreams. But that was different, he told himself. That was survival. This was success. Inside the ballroom, champagne flowed and string quartets played. Hudson networked effortlessly, shaking hands, exchanging business cards, closing deals with handshakes and promises. But as the night wore on, he noticed something odd. Nora kept disappearing. She'd excuse herself to take calls, slipping into hallways or empty conference rooms. When she returned, her expression would be carefully neutral, but Hudson caught glimpses of something else underneath calculation. Hunger. "Who keeps calling you?" Hudson asked during a quiet moment. Nora sipped her champagne. "My brother. His tech firm is expanding. He's excited." "The one you wanted me to invest in?" "The one you did invest in," Nora corrected smoothly. 3 million, remember? It's already showing returns. Hudson nodded, but unease prickled at the back of his neck. He hadn't seen any returns. He hadn't even seen detailed reports. 2 weeks later, the cracks began to show. Hudson sat in his downtown office, reviewing quarterly financials, when Marcus burst through the door without knocking. "We have a problem," Marcus said, his face pale. Hudson looked up. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves $5 million missing from our development fund." Hudson's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Marcus threw a folder onto Hudson's desk. "Look at the transfers. Over the past 2 months, funds have been moved to something called Blackwell Technologies. That's Nora's brother's company, isn't it?" Hudson opened the folder, his hands suddenly unsteady. Transaction after transaction, each one approved with his digital signature, except he didn't remember signing half of them. "Marcus, I authorized 3 million. Try 5, and that's just what I've found so far." Hudson's jaw tightened. "I'll handle this." "Handle it fast, Hudson. We're supposed to break ground on the downtown project next month. If that money's gone..." "It's not gone. It's invested." Marcus stared at him. "You better hope you're right, because if this deal falls through, we're looking at lawsuits from every investor who trusted us." After Marcus left, Hudson sat in silence, staring at the transactions. His phone buzzed a text from Nora. "Dinner tonight? I'm making reservations at Chateau." Hudson didn't reply. Instead, he called his accountant. "I need you to audit all transactions related to Blackwell Technologies. Everything, and I need it done quietly." "How quietly?" "My wife can't know." There was a pause. "Understood. I'll have something by tomorrow." Hudson hung up and stared out the window at the city below. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his gut. The same instinct that had helped him build his empire was now screaming that he'd made a terrible mistake. But confronting Nora meant admitting he'd been played. It meant acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, Lainey had been the real partner all along. He pushed the thought away. It was too late for regrets. That night, Hudson came home early from a canceled client meeting. The penthouse was dark except for a sliver of light beneath Nora's office door. Usually she'd be in the living room, watching financial news or reading. The silence felt wrong. Hudson loosened his tie and headed toward the kitchen for a drink. That's when he heard her voice low, clipped, speaking in a tone he'd never heard her use before. "He's too easy to control. Once the transfer clears, I'm gone. My brother needs just 3 more months." Hudson froze in the hallway, his heart suddenly pounding. "No, he doesn't suspect anything," Nora continued. Her voice was cold, businesslike. Nothing like the warm, flirtatious woman who'd seduced him away from his dying wife. He's too proud to ask questions, too desperate to prove he made the right choice. Hudson's blood went cold. "I've already moved 40% of the liquid assets offshore. The development fund is next. By the time his projects collapse, we'll be in Monaco." There was a pause. Then Nora laughed a sound Hudson had never heard from her before. Sharp, merciless. "Of course I don't love him. Please. He threw away a loyal wife for me. You think I respect a man like that? He's a means to an end. A very profitable end." Hudson backed away slowly, carefully, his mind reeling. His hands shook, his chest felt tight. Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The mysterious transfers, her insistence on handling certain accounts, the pressure to divorce Lainey quickly, the way she'd isolated him from old friends and business partners, replacing them with her contacts. He'd been played from the beginning. Hudson walked quietly to the master bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. These were the hands that had signed divorce papers while his wife begged for mercy. These were the hands that had pushed away loyalty for the illusion of ambition. And now those same hands had signed away his empire to a woman who saw him as nothing more than an ATM. He wanted to confront her, to rage, to demand answers. But fear stopped him. If she'd already moved 40% offshore, if she had 3 months planned, confronting her now would only accelerate her timeline. Hudson needed proof, documentation, a strategy. He opened his laptop with trembling fingers and began combing through financial records, each discovery worse than the last. 300 miles away, in a small-town hospital, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Lainey sat up in bed without assistance for the first time in 4 months. Sunlight streamed through the window, real sunlight, not the gray rain that had accompanied her darkest days. "Excellent," Dr. Ellis said, checking her chart. "Your strength is coming back beautifully." Lainey smiled weakly. "I can sit up for 5 minutes before I get tired. That's not exactly marathon ready." Dr. Ellis chuckled. 4 months ago, you couldn't lift a glass of water. Now you're sitting unassisted. That's not progress, Lainey. That's a miracle." He pulled up a chair and sat beside her bed, the same chair Hudson had refused to sit in, the chair that had remained empty through Lainey's darkest nights. "I have something to tell you," Dr. Ellis said quietly. "Something I don't usually share with patients." Lainey looked at him curiously. 3 years ago, I lost my wife to cancer. Sarah. She fought for 18 months. His voice was soft but steady. "And during that time, I learned something important about people. The ones who stay during your darkness, they're rare, precious. The ones who leave?" He paused. "They teach you something different, that you're stronger than you ever imagined." Tears filled Lainey's eyes. "I'm sorry about your wife." "Thank you, doctor." Ellis smiled gently. "But I'm telling you this because I see something in you, Lainey. You're not just surviving, you're rebuilding. And that takes courage most people don't have." After he left, Lainey sat in the quiet room, something shifting inside her chest. She wasn't the same woman Hudson had abandoned. That woman had been gentle, trusting, perhaps too willing to sacrifice herself. The woman sitting in this hospital bed was different, harder, wiser. And slowly, carefully, she was beginning to realize she wanted more than survival. She wanted justice. Lainey reached for the folder her lawyer had left during his last visit, documents from the divorce proceedings. She'd been too weak to review them before, too heartbroken to care about legal details. Now, she opened the folder with steady hands. Inside were property deeds, business licenses, construction permits, all registered under both her and Hudson's names. Documents she'd signed years ago, when Hudson needed her name for tax purposes and protection. Her lawyer had highlighted several items in yellow marker. A note in the margin read, "These assets require your signature for transfer or renewal. You retain legal claim until you formally relinquish rights." Lainey's heart began to beat faster. Hudson had thought he was erasing her from his life. But in his haste to move on, to build his empire with his new wife, he'd forgotten the paper trail that still bound them. She picked up her phone, a new number, since she'd canceled the one Hudson kept ignoring, and dialed her lawyer. "Mr. Patterson? It's Lainey Ellis." She'd already filed to reclaim her maiden name. "I need to schedule a meeting about those highlighted documents, the ones with my name on them." "Of course, Mrs. Ellis. Are you feeling well enough to meet in person?" Lainey looked at her reflection in the window. She looked different than she had 6 months ago. Thinner, yes, weaker in body, but her eyes were harder, clearer. "Yes," she said firmly. "I think it's time I understood exactly what I'm entitled to." "Excellent. I'll bring the full file. There's quite a bit to discuss." After hanging up, Lainey pulled out a notebook Dr. Ellis had given her for physical therapy notes. Instead, she began making a different kind of list. Not a list of revenge, not a list of anger, a list of possibilities. If Hudson had forgotten her, he'd also forgotten what she was capable of. He'd forgotten that she'd been the one managing his early accounts, researching zoning laws, organizing his first contracts while he slept. He'd mistaken her gentleness for weakness, her kindness for stupidity, her love for dependence. He was about to learn the difference. Outside, spring arrived softly. Trees that had been bare through Lainey's long winter began showing tiny buds of green. Birds returned to the hospital courtyard, their songs filtering through the open window. In the city, Hudson stared at financial records that revealed a betrayal he'd never seen coming, his perfect life cracking like thin ice. In the small town, Lainey stared at legal documents that revealed power she'd forgotten she possessed, her broken spirit hardening into something new. Two people, two reckonings, one collision course that would change everything. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after Hudson's wedding to Nora. Hudson sat in his corner office, reviewing architectural plans for the Riverside development, his biggest project yet. A $200 million government-contracted complex that would cement his reputation as one of the city's premier developers. It was the crown jewel of his empire, the project that would prove he'd made the right choices. His phone rang. The city planning commissioner. "Mr. Luca, we have a problem with your permits." Hudson's pen stopped mid-signature. "What kind of problem?" "Your construction license for the Riverside project. It's been flagged by our legal department. We can't approve the groundbreaking until it's resolved." Hudson frowned. "That license was approved 6 months ago. What's the issue?" "The primary license is registered under Lainey M. Luca. Our records show she needs to sign the renewal documentation. Without her signature, we can't proceed." The room suddenly felt colder. That's my ex-wife. The divorce was finalized months ago." "I understand, Mr. Luca, but the license hasn't been transferred. Until Mrs. Luca signs the renewal or formally transfers ownership, the project is frozen." "How long do I have?" "The license expires in 2 weeks. After that, you'll need to reapply, which could take 6 to 8 months. Hudson's grip tightened on the phone. "I'll handle it." "I hope so. We have investors watching this project very closely." After hanging up, Hudson sat in stunned silence. Then he exploded into action, barking at his assistant through the intercom. "Get me Marcus, now. And pull every file related to the Riverside licensing." Within minutes, his office was in chaos. Marcus arrived with the legal team, and they spread documents across the conference table like surgeons performing emergency triage. "Here," Marcus said, pointing to a document dated 5 years earlier. "The primary construction license, registered under Hudson, Luca, and Lainey M. Luca. Joint ownership for tax and liability purposes." Hudson stared at the signatures, his confident scrawl, and Lainey's careful, looping handwriting. He remembered that day. They'd been in their small apartment, and Lainey had asked why she needed to sign. "It's just paperwork, baby," he'd said. "Trust me." And she had. She'd always trusted him. Can't we just process it without her signature? Hudson asked. The lead attorney shook his head. Not for a government contract. The city requires all registered owners to sign off. If she refuses or can't be reached, you'll need to go through formal legal proceedings to remove her from the license. That could take months. We don't have months. Hudson slammed his hand on the table. We have investors ready to pull out if we don't break ground on schedule. We have contractors on standby. We have a problem, Marcus interrupted quietly. And the only solution is getting Lainey's signature. Hudson's jaw clenched. He pulled out his phone and dialed Lainey's number, the one he'd ignored dozens of times while she was in the hospital. The number you have reached is no longer in service. He tried again. Same message. Panic began to creep up his spine like ice water. Get me her lawyer's contact information, Hudson ordered. Now. 20 minutes later, Hudson sat alone in his office, phone pressed to his ear as it rang once, twice, 3 times. Patterson and Associates, how may I help you? This is Hudson Luca. I need to speak with whoever handles Lainey Luca's account. One moment, please. The hold music felt like it lasted an eternity. Finally, a calm male voice came on the line. Mr. Luca, this is James Patterson. What can I do for you? Hudson forced his voice to remain steady. I need to contact my ex-wife. It's urgent. There's a business matter that requires her signature. I see. The lawyer's tone was professionally neutral. And what is the nature of this business matter? Construction licenses. For the Riverside development, they're registered in both our names. Ah, yes. I'm familiar with those documents. Relief flooded through Hudson. Good. Then you can help me reach her. I need her to sign renewal papers immediately. I'm afraid that's not possible, Mr. Luca. Hudson's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Mrs. Lainey Luca no longer exists. The words hit Hudson like a physical blow. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. What? What are you saying? Is she? She's very much alive, Mr. Luca. The lawyer's voice remained calm, almost amused. But you divorced her, remember? She's reclaimed her maiden name. Dr. Lainey Ellis. And yes, she's remarried. Hudson's world tilted sideways. Ellis? She remarried? 3 weeks ago. To Dr. Richard Ellis, a respected physician. They're quite happy, from what I understand. Hudson's hands shook. His voice came out strangled. I need to speak with her. About the licenses. It's urgent. I'll pass along your message. But I should inform you, Mr. Luca, that Dr. Ellis is currently reviewing all assets registered in her former name. She's been made aware of her legal rights and is considering her options. Options? What options? Those licenses are for my company. Your company that was built partially with her name, her credit, her signatures. The law is quite clear on joint ownership, Mr. Luca, Doctor. Ellis has every right to maintain her claim or negotiate terms for transfer. Hudson's voice rose. This is insane. She can't just... She can. And frankly, Mr. Luca, given the circumstances of your divorce, I'd advise you to approach this situation with considerable humility. I need those signatures by next week, or the entire project collapses. Then I suggest you prepare a very compelling offer. Good day, Mr. Luca. The line went dead. Hudson sat frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, the dial tone buzzing like an angry wasp. Slowly he lowered the phone and stared at the city skyline through his window. Lainey had remarried, to a doctor. She'd moved on while he'd been celebrating his own new marriage, oblivious to the legal time bomb she'd left behind. No, not left behind. That implied accident. The careful neutrality in her lawyer's voice, the phrase, reviewing all assets, the mention of her legal rights. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate. Hudson burst into the penthouse that evening, his face flushed with rage and panic. Nora sat on the white leather sofa, sipping wine and scrolling through her phone. She looked up, mildly annoyed by his dramatic entrance. We have a problem, Hudson said without preamble. We always have problems, darling. Be more specific. The Riverside project is frozen. The licenses are in Lainey's name, and she won't sign. Nora's expression didn't change. Then make her sign. I can't reach her. She's remarried, changed her name, and her lawyer says she's reviewing her options. Hudson paced like a caged animal. Do you understand what this means? If we can't break ground in 2 weeks, the investors will pull out. The whole project collapses. Then offer her money. This isn't about money, Hudson exploded. This is about... He stopped, staring at Nora, really looking at her for the first time. Her expression was too calm, too controlled. You knew. Knew what? You knew about the licenses, about Lainey's name on the documents. Nora sighed and set down her wine glass. Of course I knew. I reviewed all your assets before we got married. I'm not stupid, Hudson. And you didn't think to mention it? I assumed you'd handle it. She stood, smoothing her designer dress. But since we're talking about problems, let's discuss the real issue here. Hudson's eyes narrowed. What real issue? Your complete incompetence. Nora's voice turned cold, the warm facade cracking like thin ice. You built an empire on borrowed credit in your wife's name, then threw her away like garbage without securing your assets first. That's not ambition, Hudson. That's stupidity. Nora. And now you're panicking because the woman you abandoned holds the keys to everything you think you own. She laughed bitterly. Did you ever wonder how much of your empire was actually yours? Hudson felt the blood drain from his face. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that while you were playing big shot developer, your loyal little wife was signing documents, providing credit, acting as co-owner on half your properties. And you were too blind to notice because you were too busy being embarrassed by her sickness. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Nora moved closer, her eyes glittering with something ugly. I've spent the last 3 months reviewing your finances, Hudson. Do you want to know what I found? Debt. Mountains of it. Your empire is a house of cards held together by credit and Lainey's signatures. Hudson's hands clenched into fists. If you knew this, why did you marry me? Nora's smile was razor sharp. Because debt can be transferred, assets can be liquidated, and stupid men can be manipulated. The truth hit Hudson like a sledgehammer. The missing funds, Blackwell Technologies, you've been stealing from me. Stealing? Nora laughed. I've been strategically relocating assets from a sinking ship. You should be thanking me for getting something out before your ex-wife takes everything. You. Hudson lunged forward, but Nora stepped back smoothly, her phone already in her hand. Touch me and I'll have you arrested, she said calmly. I have recordings, Hudson. Conversations where you discuss manipulating finances, hiding assets from Lainey during the divorce. One call to the authorities and you'll face fraud charges. Hudson froze. You're bluffing. Try me. Nora picked up her wine glass again. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to finish transferring what remains of your liquid assets. Then I'm going to file for divorce, citing your abusive behavior. And you're going to let me go quietly or I'll bury you. I'll fight you. You'll what? You can't even fight your dying ex-wife for your own business licenses. Nora's voice dripped with contempt. You threw away a woman who loved you for nothing. I'm just taking what you were stupid enough to give me. The difference is, I don't feel guilty about it. She walked toward the bedroom, then paused at the door. Oh, and Hudson? That magazine cover we were on? I already sold the story to a journalist friend. About how you divorced your sick wife for a younger woman, then lost everything. It will be published tomorrow. The door closed with a soft click. Hudson stood alone in the middle of the pristine white living room, his perfect life crumbling around him like ash. The story broke at 6 a.m. the next morning. Hudson's phone started buzzing before sunrise. Text after text, call after call. He ignored them all until Marcus barged into his penthouse, tablet in hand. Have you seen this? Marcus demanded. Hudson looked at the screen. The headline made his stomach drop. Real estate mogul Hudson Luca, from power couple to crumbling empire. Below it a photograph. Hudson and Nora at a gala, smiling. And beside it, another photo grainy, clearly taken without permission of Lainey in her hospital bed, pale and weak. The article was devastating. Hudson Luca, celebrated developer and recent recipient of the Developer of the Year award, built his empire with the help of his wife Lainey, then abandoned her when she became ill. Sources close to the situation reveal that Luca filed for divorce while his wife was hospitalized with a severe autoimmune disease, leaving her to face mounting medical bills alone. Now, as his new marriage crumbles and his signature project faces collapse, insiders question whether Luca's success was ever really his own. Hudson's phone exploded with notifications. Social media was on fire. At City Watch, "This is the man we celebrated? Disgusting." At Real Estate Tea, his sick wife helped build his company, and he threw her away for a younger model. Karma's real. At Justice News, update. Sources say Hudson Luca's biggest project is frozen because his ex-wife still owns the licenses. The irony. Marcus stared at Hudson with something close to horror. The investors are calling. They want an emergency meeting. They're talking about pulling out completely. Hudson couldn't speak. He sat down slowly on the sofa, the same sofa where Nora had calmly explained how she'd been robbing him blind. His phone rang. Another investor. He didn't answer. Another call. A business partner. He let it go to voicemail. The buzzing continued, relentless, damning. Each notification was another nail in the coffin of the empire he'd built by sacrificing everything and everyone that mattered. In the reflection of the dark television screen, Hudson saw himself, disheveled, pale, alone in a penthouse that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. He'd wanted peace, he'd wanted success, he'd wanted to be free of the burden of a sick wife. Now he had none of those things. And 300 miles away, in a small hospital room filled with morning sunlight, Lainey Ellis sat with her lawyer, reviewing documents and making decisions that would reshape both their futures. The collapse had begun. And Hudson Luca was about to learn that the woman he'd left to die had become the only person who could save him or destroy him completely. 5 months after the divorce, Lainey stood at the window of her hospital room, looking out at the garden below without holding onto anything for support. Her legs trembled slightly, but they held. 6 months ago, she couldn't lift a glass of water. Now she could stand for 20 minutes at a time. "That's remarkable progress," Dr. Ellis said from the doorway, his voice warm with genuine pride. Lainey turned, smiling. "I walked to the nurse's station and back this morning, twice." "I heard," Grace said. "You made it look easy." "I wouldn't say easy." Lainey moved slowly back to her chair, lowering herself with careful control. "But possible. That's more than I had before." Dr. Ellis pulled up a chair beside her, the same chair he'd sat in countless times over the past months. What had started as doctor-patient checkups had evolved into something else. Conversations. Real ones. About books and music and loss and hope. About what it meant to rebuild after everything fell apart. "I have a question for you," Dr. Ellis said, "and you're free to say no." Lainey looked at him curiously. "We have a patient in the West Wing, Martha. She's 73, recovering from a stroke. Her family hasn't visited in weeks." He paused. "She reminds me of you when you first arrived. Alone. Trying to be brave." Lainey's chest tightened. She knew that loneliness intimately. "I thought maybe you could visit her. Just to talk. I think it would help her to see someone who's survived what she's going through." "You want me to volunteer?" "Only if you feel ready. But Lainey, you have something rare. You've walked through darkness and come out stronger. That kind of strength? Other people need to see it. They need to know it's possible." 2 days later, Lainey sat beside Martha's bed, holding the older woman's trembling hand. Martha cried quietly, telling Lainey about her children who were too busy to visit, about her husband who'd passed away 5 years ago, about how she felt like a burden no one wanted to carry. "I know," Lainey said softly. "I understand exactly how that feels." "You do?" Lainey nodded. "My husband divorced me while I was in this hospital. He said he needed peace, that I was too much for him to handle." Martha's eyes widened. "That's cruel." "Yes, it was." Lainey squeezed her hand gently. "But you know what I learned? The people who abandon us tell us who they are, not who we are. You're not a burden, Martha. You're a woman who's fighting, and that takes more courage than walking away ever will." Martha's tears fell harder, but this time they seemed different, cleansing somehow. Over the following weeks, Lainey visited Martha daily. Then she started visiting other patients in similar situations, People whose families had disappeared when illness made caregiving difficult. People who felt forgotten. With each visit, Lainey felt something shifting inside herself. Her own pain was transforming into purpose. Her abandonment was becoming a bridge to others who understood. Grace, the night nurse who'd stayed with Lainey through her darkest hours, watched the transformation with quiet amazement. "You're different," Grace said one afternoon. "Stronger." Lainey smiled. "I had good teachers, people who stayed when they didn't have to." One evening, Dr. Ellis found Lainey in the hospital's small library, surrounded by cardboard boxes. "Spring cleaning?" he asked. Lainey looked up, her face flushed with emotion. "My lawyer dropped off boxes of documents from the divorce, things I'd left in storage. I've been avoiding them, but—" She gestured at the papers spread around her. "I needed to face it." Dr. Ellis sat down across from her. And I found something impossible." Lainey held up a stack of property deeds, her hands shaking slightly. "These are all in my name. Properties I didn't even know we owned. Or that I owned." Dr. Ellis frowned. "What do you mean?" "Hudson put them in my name years ago. He said it was for tax purposes, for protection. I signed whatever he asked me to because I trusted him." Her voice cracked. "But he never transferred them out after the divorce." She pulled out another document. "And this, the construction license for his biggest project, the Riverside development. It's registered under Lainey M. Luca, joint ownership. Can he use your signature from before?" "No. These licenses require renewal every few years. Current signatures from all registered owners." Lainey's eyes were wide with disbelief. "He can't proceed without my permission." Dr. Ellis was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." Lainey looked at the documents like they were a map to a country she'd never visited. "I called my lawyer. He's reviewing everything. He said I might have legal claim to 40% of Hudson's current holdings." 40%? Properties, licenses, business registrations. Hudson was so focused on building his empire that he never cleaned up the paperwork. And when he left me, he was in such a hurry to move on that he forgot what connected us legally. Lainey set the papers down carefully, her expression complex, not angry, but not soft either. "Mr. Patterson, my lawyer," he asked what I wanted to do. "If I wanted to fight for the money." She looked up at Dr. Ellis. "Do you know what I realized?" "What?" "I don't want revenge. I'm not interested in destroying Hudson just to make him suffer." Her voice was steady, certain. "But I won't let him hurt anyone else with those assets. I won't let him build his empire on the backs of people he considers disposable." Dr. Ellis smiled slowly. "So what will you do?" Lainey gathered the papers carefully, her mind already working. Something better than revenge. Something that actually matters. 2 weeks later, Lainey sat in her lawyer's office with Dr. Ellis beside her. James Patterson spread documents across his mahogany desk, his expression serious but intrigued. "You're certain about this direction?" he asked. Lainey nodded firmly. "Completely." "Then let me outline what's possible." Patterson pulled out a highlighted list. "You have legal claim to 4 commercial properties, 2 residential buildings, and controlling interest in 6 business licenses, including the critical Riverside development license. Current estimated value? Approximately $50 million in assets, maybe more depending on market conditions." Dr. Ellis whistled softly. Lainey sat very still, absorbing the number. "Here's what I propose," Lainey said, her voice steady. "I want to establish a foundation. A rehabilitation and recovery center for chronically ill patients who've been abandoned by their families. People with nowhere else to go." Patterson's pen stopped mid-note. "A foundation? Using those properties. The residential buildings can be converted to patient housing. The commercial properties can generate income to sustain operations. I want to create something that actually helps people." "Lainey," Patterson said carefully, "you could sell these assets, negotiate settlements, make yourself very wealthy." "I don't want to be wealthy. I want to be useful." Lainey leaned forward. "For months I lay in that hospital bed feeling worthless, thrown away. Like my life didn't matter because I was sick. No one should feel that way, ever." Dr. Ellis placed his hand gently over Lainey's. "It's a beautiful idea. It's also legally complex, Patterson warned. Hudson will fight this. He'll claim those assets were always intended for his business use, that your signatures were procedural, not ownership. Can he win? Patterson smiled slowly. Not if we're thorough. Your name is on legal documents going back years. You have email correspondence discussing your role in the business. You have bank records showing your financial contributions during the early years. He tapped his pen against the desk. No, Mrs. Ellis. If we do this right, Hudson Luca won't have a leg to stand on. Then let's do it right. There's one more thing, Dr. Ellis said quietly. The foundation needs a name. Lainey thought for a moment, remembering all the nights Grace sat with her, all the times Dr. Ellis had treated her like a person, not a burden, all the patients she'd visited who felt forgotten. The Lainey Ellis Recovery Fund, she said, built from what was broken for those the world forgot. Patterson wrote it down, nodding approval. I'll start the legal proceedings immediately. But Lainey, you should know this will become public. Your story, Hudson's abandonment, everything. Good, Lainey said firmly. Let people know. Maybe it will help someone else feel less alone. 3 weeks later, an elegant invitation arrived in Lainey's mail. You are cordially invited to speak at the annual Autoimmune Awareness Gala. We would be honored to have you share your story of resilience and recovery as our keynote speaker. Lainey stared at the invitation, her hands trembling slightly. Public speaking had never been her strength. The thought of standing before hundreds of people, sharing her story of abandonment and illness, made her chest tight with anxiety. You should do it, Dr. Ellis said, reading the invitation over her shoulder. I don't know if I can. You visit patients every day and give them hope just by talking. This is the same thing, just a larger audience. What if I break down? What if? Then you break down, Dr. Ellis said gently. And people will see that recovery isn't about being perfect, it's about being real. Lainey looked at him, this kind, steady man who'd sat beside her bed when she had nothing, who'd encouraged her recovery without expecting anything in return, who'd helped her see that her value wasn't determined by who stayed or left. Richard, she said quietly, using his first name, something she rarely did. Why have you been so kind to me? Dr. Ellis was quiet for a moment. Then he took her hand carefully. Because when my wife was sick, I saw how cruel the world can be to people who are suffering, how quickly they become invisible. And I promised myself that if I ever had the power to make someone feel seen again, I would. Tears filled Lainey's eyes. Lainey Ellis, Dr. Ellis said, his voice soft but certain. Will you let me walk beside you? Not behind you, not ahead of you, just beside you. Through the difficult things and the good things and everything in between. Lainey understood what he was asking. It wasn't just about the gala. It was about a future, together. Yes, she whispered. I would like that very much. Dr. Ellis smiled, and there in the quiet hospital courtyard, with spring flowers blooming around them, he kissed her forehead gently. That same afternoon, Lainey called the gala organizers and accepted the invitation. She spent the next 3 weeks preparing her speech, writing and rewriting, practicing in front of Martha and the other patients she'd befriended. They became her test audience, offering suggestions and encouragement. Tell them about the empty chair, Martha said. That will make them understand. Tell them you're not a victim, another patient added. Tell them you're a survivor. Lainey wove their advice into her story, building something powerful and true. The night before the gala, Dr. Ellis took her to dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the river. They talked about the foundation, about patients they'd helped, about the future that was slowly coming into focus. Are you nervous? He asked. Terrified, Lainey admitted, but ready. That's the definition of courage, being terrified and doing it anyway. They talked late into the evening, and when Dr. Ellis drove her home to the small apartment she'd rented, he walked her to the door. Tomorrow, you're going to change lives, he said, including your own. Thank you, Lainey said, for believing I could. I always did. Across town, in a nearly empty penthouse, Hudson Luca stared at the same gala invitation. His assistant had forwarded it days ago, suggesting it might be good for his image to attend a charity event, to show he wasn't the heartless man the media had painted him. Hudson read the invitation details. Keynote speaker, Dr. Lainey Ellis, founder of the Ellis Recovery Fund. The name meant nothing to him. Dr. Ellis sounded accomplished, professional, the kind of speaker who would deliver an inspiring speech about medical research or patient advocacy. Hudson set the invitation aside, deciding he would attend. He needed positive press. He needed to rebuild his reputation. A charity gala would be a good start. He had no idea that Dr. Lainey Ellis was the woman he'd left dying in a hospital bed. He had no idea that the keynote speaker was his ex-wife. He had no idea that tomorrow night, his past and present would collide in the most public way possible. And he had no idea that the woman he'd once called too weak to matter was about to show him and the world what true strength looked like. Hudson stood outside the grand ballroom of the Bellevue Hotel, adjusting his tie with unsteady hands. The suit hung looser on him than it had 3 months ago. He'd lost nearly 20 pounds from stress and sleepless nights. His face looked gaunt in the reflection of the polished brass doors, shadows beneath his eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. He barely recognized himself. The man who'd once walked red carpets with confidence, who'd commanded rooms full of investors, who'd been photographed for magazine covers, that man felt like a ghost. What remained was a hollow shell desperately trying to maintain appearances. Inside his jacket pocket, his phone buzzed relentlessly. More messages from creditors, more emails from lawyers, more reminders that his empire was collapsing faster than he could stop it. Nora had left the country 2 weeks ago. Switzerland, according to her attorney, though Hudson suspected she'd moved the money even further. Monaco, the Caymans, somewhere he'd never reach. She'd taken everything she could and vanished like smoke. His mansion was being seized next month. The Riverside development had officially collapsed after investors pulled out. 3 lawsuits were pending. His business partner Marcus had quit, taking half their remaining clients with him. But tonight was about survival, about finding someone, anyone, who might believe Hudson Luca still had value. He'd practiced his pitch in the mirror that morning. I'm restructuring, building something leaner, more focused, looking for visionary partners who see opportunity where others see risk. The words tasted like ash, but desperation had a way of making liars of proud men. Hudson straightened his shoulders, forced what he hoped passed for confidence, and walked through the doors. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and hundreds of well-dressed guests. Champagne flowed, string quartets played softly. The city's elite mingled and networked beneath soft lighting that made everyone look successful and important. Hudson grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and moved through the crowd, searching for familiar faces. People he'd done business with, people who might not have heard about his failures yet. But everywhere he turned, conversation stopped. Eyes slid away from his. Someone actually turned their back when he approached. The isolation was suffocating. Hudson Luca, isn't it? Hudson turned to see an older man in a tuxedo, face vaguely familiar. A banker, maybe, or a former investor. Yes, Hudson said, relief flooding through him. Have we met? Once, years ago. The man's smile was cold. I just wanted to tell you my daughter went through something similar. Her husband left her when she got cancer, took everything, and walked away. Hudson's stomach dropped. I'm sorry to hear that. Save it. The man's voice was ice. Men like you don't deserve second chances. He walked away, leaving Hudson standing alone, with his champagne glass trembling in his hand. The lights dimmed. A voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our keynote presentation will begin shortly. Hudson found a chair near the back, grateful for the darkness. He could hide here, observe, maybe slip out early if the networking wasn't working. On stage, the MC approached the microphone, a woman in an elegant navy dress, smiling warmly at the crowd. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 15th Annual Autoimmune Awareness Gala. Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from someone truly remarkable. A woman who has not only survived a devastating illness, but has transformed her experience into a mission to help others. Hudson sipped his champagne, only half listening. Another inspirational speaker, another story of overcoming adversity. He'd heard dozens of them at events like this. She's a survivor, an advocate, and the founder of the Ellis Recovery Fund, a foundation dedicated to providing support for chronically ill patients who have been abandoned by their families. Something cold prickled at the back of Hudson's neck. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Lainey Ellis. The room erupted in applause. Hudson's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud that was swallowed by the clapping. No, it couldn't be. The stage lights came up, illuminating a woman walking confidently across the platform. Hudson's blood turned to ice. It was Lainey. But not the Lainey he remembered. Not the pale, trembling woman he'd left dying in a hospital bed. Not the wife who'd begged him not to go. This woman stood tall and healthy. Her hair, which had been thin and brittle from illness and medication, now fell in soft waves past her shoulders. She wore a deep blue dress that fit her perfectly, showing a body that had recovered its strength. Her face glowed with health and confidence. She was beautiful. She was alive. She was thriving. Hudson couldn't breathe. His heart hammered against his ribs. Around him, people clapped and smiled, but all he could hear was white noise and the thundering of his own pulse. Lainey reached the microphone and smiled at the crowd, a genuine, warm smile that Hudson hadn't seen in years, not since before she got sick. Not since before he'd started to see her as a burden instead of a partner. "Thank you," Lainey said, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Hudson sat paralyzed as Lainey began to speak. "5 months ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, dying from an autoimmune disease that was shutting down my body piece by piece." Her voice was calm, almost conversational, as if she were telling a story about someone else. "I was alone, frightened, and abandoned by the person I trusted most in the world." The audience was silent, transfixed. "My husband, my partner of 8 years, the man I'd supported through his hardest struggles, divorced me while I was fighting for my life. He said he needed peace." Hudson felt hundreds of eyes on him, though no one actually looked his way. Shame burned through him like acid. "For a long time, I thought that abandonment defined me, that being thrown away meant I was worthless." Lainey's eyes scanned the crowd, her gaze clear and direct. "But something remarkable happened during my recovery. I met people, doctors, nurses, other patients who showed me that my value wasn't determined by who stayed or left. It was determined by who I chose to become." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Sometimes," Lainey continued, her voice growing stronger, "the person who leaves you broken is the same one who teaches you how to heal yourself. Not because they meant to teach you, but because their absence forces you to discover strength you never knew you had." Hudson's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "I founded the Ellis Recovery Fund because I learned something important during my darkest days. No one should face chronic illness alone. No one should be made to feel disposable because their body is failing. No one should be abandoned when they need love most." The audience murmured in agreement. Several people wiped tears from their eyes. Lainey smiled, and in that smile was something Hudson had never expected to see: peace. Real peace. Not the hollow relief he'd felt after leaving her, but genuine contentment. "Today I stand before you healthy and whole, not because someone saved me, but because I saved myself, with the help of compassionate people who saw my humanity when others saw only my weakness." Her eyes swept across the room and landed for just a fraction of a second directly on Hudson. No anger flashed in her gaze, no bitterness, just calm acknowledgement. "I see you," her eyes seemed to say, "and I am not afraid of you anymore." Then her gaze moved on, and Hudson felt the loss of even that brief connection like a physical blow. "The Ellis Recovery Fund exists to be what I needed when I had nothing, a place of refuge, dignity, and hope. Because everyone deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be given a chance to heal." Lainey gestured toward a screen behind her, and photographs appeared: the foundation's properties, patients receiving care, volunteers working with chronically ill people who had nowhere else to go. Hudson noticed the ring on Lainey's left hand as she gestured, catching the light. A simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing extravagant, but worn with obvious pride. She'd remarried, moved on, built a new life, and he'd lost everything. The irony was suffocating. Lainey finished her speech to a standing ovation. The entire ballroom rose to their feet, applause thundering through the space. Hudson stood mechanically with everyone else, his legs weak, his vision blurring. People swarmed toward the stage as Lainey descended, wanting to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell her their own stories. She greeted each person with warmth and genuine interest. Hudson moved through the crowd like a man in a dream, pushing toward her. He didn't know what he would say. He didn't know what he wanted. But he had to reach her, had to speak to her, had to somehow. "Excuse me." A man stepped smoothly into Hudson's path. He was in his mid-40s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He wore a simple tuxedo and carried himself with quiet confidence. "I'm Dr. Richard Ellis," the man said, extending his hand. "Lainey's husband." Hudson stared at the offered hand like it was a snake. Slowly, mechanically, he shook it. "Hudson Luca," he managed. "I know who you are." Dr. Ellis's voice wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm either. Simply factual. "Is there something I can help you with?" "I need to speak with Lainey." "With Dr. Ellis. It's important." "About?" Hudson's mind raced. "Business. Legal matters. Documents that require her attention." Dr. Ellis's expression didn't change. "You can contact her lawyer for that. Mr. Patterson handles all her legal affairs." "I've tried." "He won't." Hudson stopped himself, hearing the desperation in his own voice. "Please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Dr. Ellis studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Wait here." He disappeared into the crowd, leaving Hudson standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by people who whispered and pointed. "That's him. That's the man who left her. Can you believe he has the nerve to show his face here? She's so much better off without him." Hudson wanted to disappear, to run, to wake up from this nightmare. Then the crowd parted, and Lainey appeared beside her husband. She looked directly at Hudson, her face composed and unreadable. Up close, he could see the subtle changes in her, the lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Marks of pain survived, but also strength in her posture, confidence in her gaze. "Hudson," she said quietly. "Not Mrs. Luca, not darling, just his name, neutral and distant. I hope you're well." The kindness in her voice, the genuine concern, as if she were speaking to a stranger she wished no ill cut deeper than any anger could have. "Lainey, Hudson's carefully practiced words evaporated. "Your speech, it was. You look healthy?" she offered gently. "Yes, I am. Thank you. I need to talk to you. About the licenses, the properties. There's been some confusion." "Not here, Hudson." Her voice was still kind but firm. "My lawyer can discuss those matters with you. Tonight is about the foundation, about helping others. Please, just 5 minutes." She said not here. Dr. Ellis stepped slightly closer to his wife, not threatening but protective. "I think you should respect that." Hudson looked between them, this couple who clearly cared for each other, who stood together with the ease of true partnership. Everything he'd thrown away. "I'm sorry," Hudson whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. "For everything." Lainey's expression softened slightly. "I forgave you a long time ago, Hudson, but forgiveness doesn't mean we go back. It means I'm free to move forward." She touched her husband's arm gently. "Richard, we should greet the other guests." Dr. Ellis nodded, placing his hand over hers in a gesture of such simple intimacy that Hudson felt physically ill. "Goodbye, Hudson," Lainey said. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, just final. They walked away together, and Hudson stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom as the crowd swallowed them. Around him, the gala continued. People laughed and talked and celebrated. Someone clinked a glass. The string quartet played something light and beautiful. And Hudson Luca stood alone in the center of it all, finally understanding what he'd truly lost. Not money, not properties, not business success. He'd lost the only person who'd ever loved him for who he was, not what he had. And now she is gone forever. The announcement came on a gray Tuesday morning in late autumn. Luca Real Estate Empire declares bankruptcy. Hudson sat in his lawyer's office, staring at the press release on the desk between them. The words blurred together, meaningless black marks on white paper that somehow spelled the end of everything he'd built. "We had no choice," his lawyer said, voice flat with professional detachment. The creditors were moving to seize assets anyway. This way, we can at least attempt structured liquidation. Hudson said nothing. What was there to say? The media will be brutal, the lawyer continued. I'd advise you to avoid public statements. Refer all inquiries to our office. How long? Hudson's voice came out rough, unused. He'd barely spoken to anyone in days. How long until what? Until I have nothing left. The lawyer shuffled papers, avoiding eye contact. 6 months, maybe less. The mansion will be auctioned first, then the remaining properties, personal assets. The court will determine what's protected, but he trailed off with a shrug that said everything. Hudson walked out of the office into a wall of camera flashes. They'd been waiting for him. A pack of reporters with microphones and questions that tore at him like teeth. Mr. Luca, how do you respond to allegations of financial fraud? Is it true your wife embezzled funds before fleeing the country? What message do you have for the investors who lost everything? Hudson pushed through them, head down, hand raised to block the cameras, but one reporter's voice cut through the chaos, stopping him cold. Mr. Luca, is it true you divorced your wife when she was dying? That you left her with nothing while you... Hudson spun around, finding the reporter's face in the crowd. A young woman with sharp eyes and a recorder thrust toward him. Is it true? She repeated. Hudson's mouth opened. No words came out. What could he possibly say that wouldn't damn him further? The silence was damning enough. Camera flashes exploded. The reporter smiled, satisfied, already typing on her phone. That moment his frozen, guilty silence would be the headline everywhere by noon. Hudson turned and walked away, their questions following him like ghosts. 2 weeks later, Hudson stood in what used to be his mansion. The rooms echoed with emptiness. The furniture had been removed by the auction house. Artwork stripped from walls, leaving pale rectangles where million-dollar paintings once hung. The marble floors reflected nothing but bare space and Hudson's own hollow reflection. He walked through rooms that had once hosted parties, business dinners, celebrations of success that now felt like fever dreams from someone else's life. His footsteps echoed too loud in the silence. In the master bedroom, only his bed remained. Even Nora's side had been stripped. The walk-in closets gaped empty. The ensuite bathroom had been cleared of every luxury product, every trace of the life they'd pretended to build. Hudson sat on the edge of the bed, springs creaking in the quiet. On the nightstand sat the only personal item the auctioneers hadn't taken yet, a small, framed photograph they deemed worthless. His wedding photo with Lainey. Hudson picked it up with trembling hands, staring at the two young people captured in that moment. Hudson in his rented suit, looking hopeful and determined. Lainey in her consignment shop dress, her smile bright and genuine, her eyes full of love and belief. They'd had nothing then. A tiny apartment, more dreams than money, living on hope and determination. But they'd had each other, and somehow that had been enough. Hudson's thumb traced Lainey's face through the glass, just as she had done from her hospital bed months ago. The symmetry of the gesture wasn't lost on him. I had everything, he whispered to the empty room, his voice cracking. I had everything, and I threw it away for nothing. The words broke something inside him that had been holding together through sheer stubbornness. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged gasps. And then Hudson Luca, who hadn't cried since childhood, who'd prided himself on control and strength, wept. He wept for the wife who'd loved him, for the empire built on her sacrifice, for the man he'd been before ambition poisoned everything good in his life. He wept for all of it, alone in an empty mansion that had cost him everything that mattered. The photograph slipped from his fingers, glass cracking against the marble floor. Through the broken web of fractures, Lainey's smile remained, frozen in a moment when she'd still believed in him. Hudson curled onto his side on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the cracked photograph until the light faded and darkness filled the empty rooms. The postcard arrived the next morning. Hudson found it in his mailbox among final notices and legal documents. The front showed the Eiffel Tower at sunset, romantic and beautiful. He flipped it over with a sense of dread. Nora's handwriting, sharp and precise. Hudson, thanks for the vacation fund. Paris is lovely this time of year. You were always so much better at building things than keeping them. Such a shame, really. N.P.S. Give my regards to your ex-wife. I hear she's doing wonderfully. Hudson stared at the postcard, waiting for rage, for heartbreak, for something. But he felt only a dull, distant ache like a wound that had already scarred over. He walked back inside and dropped the postcard in the kitchen trash, not worth even the energy of tearing it up. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, his former business partner, the first communication they'd had in weeks. Saw Nora's Instagram. She's in Monaco with some French bankers. Looks like she's moved on. Thought you should know. Hudson opened Instagram against his better judgment. There she was, Nora on a yacht, wearing a white bikini and oversized sunglasses, champagne in hand. A tan, silver-haired man had his arm around her waist. The caption, "New adventures with new friends." Thousands of likes. Comments gushing about how beautiful she looked, how glamorous her life was. Hudson closed the app, set his phone face down on the counter. The betrayal stung, but not the way he'd expected. What hurt more was the realization settling over him like cold water. He'd become exactly like her. Nora had used him, discarded him when he was no longer useful. She'd seen him as a means to an end, a transaction rather than a person. And wasn't that exactly what he'd done to Lainey? Abandoned her when she became inconvenient, traded her in for someone who served his ambitions better, saw her as a burden rather than a partner. He judged Nora for being heartless and mercenary, but he'd done the same thing first. She'd just been better at it. The hypocrisy was suffocating. Hudson sank down at his kitchen counter, one of the few pieces of furniture still remaining, and put his head in his hands. The empty mansion seemed to press in around him, every echo a reminder of his own emptiness. 3 days later, Hudson collapsed. He'd been sorting through boxes of documents the bankruptcy lawyers needed, surviving on coffee and no sleep when the room started spinning. His chest tightened. His left arm went numb. Heart attack. His mind supplied distantly. This is how it ends. He tried to reach for his phone, but his legs gave out. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the cracked wedding photo on the floor. Lainey's fractured smile, the final image burned into his mind. Hudson woke up to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the antiseptic smell of a hospital. For a confused moment, he thought he was young again, visiting his grandfather after his first heart attack. Then reality crashed back: the bankruptcy, the collapse, Nora's betrayal, Lainey's face at the gala. "Mr. Luca, can you hear me?" Hudson turned his head slowly. A nurse stood beside his bed, checking his IV. Young, professional, with kind eyes that reminded him painfully of Grace, the nurse who'd cared for Lainey. "Where am I?" His voice came out as a rasp. "Street Mary's Hospital. You had a severe anxiety attack that triggered cardiac symptoms. You're stable now, but we need to keep you for observation." Street Mary's. The same hospital where Lainey had fought for her life while he'd ignored her calls. The same hospital where he'd coldly delivered divorce papers to a dying woman. The bitter irony was like poison on his tongue. Hudson stared at the ceiling tiles, white, sterile, dotted with the same acoustic pattern he'd stared at while waiting for Lainey to sign those papers. He'd been impatient then, annoyed at how long she was taking, eager to leave and get back to his real life. Now he was the one lying helpless in a hospital bed, frightened and alone. "The doctor will be in soon," the nurse said, adjusting his blanket. "Is there anyone we should call? Family? Friends?" Hudson thought about that. His parents had stopped returning his calls after the bankruptcy news broke, too ashamed of their failed son. Marcus had made it clear their partnership was over. His other friends had been business associates who'd vanished the moment his accounts emptied. "No," he said quietly. "There's no one." The nurse's expression softened with pity that made Hudson want to disappear. "Try to rest. You're in good hands." After she left, Hudson lay in the quiet room, listening to the same sounds Lainey must have heard during her long months here. The beep of monitors, the distant sound of other patients, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. He turned his head and noticed a plaque on the wall near the door, gleaming brass with engraved letters. This wing was renovated through the generous support of the Lainey Ellis Recovery Fund, built from what was broken for those the world forgot. Hudson stared at those words until they blurred with tears. He was too tired to hold back. Even here, In his lowest moment, Lainey's grace surrounded him. She'd taken what he'd thrown away and built something beautiful. She'd transformed her abandonment into purpose, while he'd transformed his empire into ruins. The nurse returned with medication. "Mr. Luca, I need you to take these." Hudson swallowed the pills obediently, too exhausted to ask what they were. As the medication began to work, pulling him towards sleep, he whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry, Lainey. God, I'm so sorry." But Lainey wasn't there to hear. She was miles away, healthy and happy with a man who valued her, building a legacy that would outlast Hudson's crumbled empire by generations. And Hudson Luca lay alone in a hospital bed, surrounded by the echoes of his own choices, finally understanding the true cost of the peace he demanded. It had cost him everything worth having. Day 3 in the hospital. Hudson lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling tiles he'd come to know intimately. Each water stain, each tiny crack in the acoustic pattern. He'd counted them obsessively during the long, sleepless nights, 247 tiles visible from his position. Lainey must have counted them too, during her months here. The thought made him nauseous. His body felt foreign to him now. Weak, unreliable. The nurses had to help him to the bathroom. His hands trembled when he tried to hold a glass of water. Simple movements left him breathless and exhausted. This was what Lainey had experienced. This helplessness. This complete dependence on the mercy of others. And he'd walked away from it. The door opened. Hudson turned his head, hope flickering stupidly in his chest. But it wasn't a friend or family member. It was his lawyer, briefcase in hand, expression grim. "Mr. Luca, how are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying," Hudson said flatly. "What's the damage?" The lawyer pulled a chair to the bedside and opened his briefcase. "The bankruptcy proceedings are moving forward. The mansion was sold at auction yesterday. Below market value, unfortunately, but I don't care about the mansion. What else? Your remaining business assets have been liquidated. After creditor payments, you'll have approximately $47,000 left. Enough to rent a modest apartment perhaps, but that's it? $47,000 from a $50 million empire?" The lawyer's silence was enough. "There's one more issue," he continued carefully. "Your health insurance lapsed 2 months ago. The hospital is asking about payment arrangements." Hudson's chest tightened. "How much?" "So far, approximately $28,000, and that's just the first 3 days." Hudson closed his eyes. He was going to leave this hospital the same way Lainey had broken and bankrupt. The symmetry was almost poetic. "I'll figure something out," he said, though he had no idea what. After the lawyer left, Hudson lay alone in the quiet room. No visitors, no flowers, no get-well cards. His phone, sitting on the bedside table, remained silent. He thought about all the times his phone had buzzed with messages when he was successful. Investors wanting meetings, partners proposing deals, friends inviting him to galas and dinners. Now, nothing. When you had money, they surrounded you. When you fell, they vanished. Just like he'd done to Lainey. The next morning, the hospital accountant appeared in Hudson's doorway. She was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a clipboard. Hudson recognized the expression on her face. He'd seen it before on the accountant, who'd told Lainey her insurance was running out. "Mr. Luca, we need to discuss your account." Hudson's jaw tightened. "I'm working on payment arrangements." "That won't be necessary." The accountant consulted her clipboard, a small smile playing at her lips. "Your bill has been paid in full." Hudson's mind went blank. "What? This morning?" An anonymous donation through the Ellis Foundation covered all current charges and established a fund for any future care you might need. The Ellis Foundation. Lainey's foundation. Hudson's throat constricted. That's not possible. Why would... "I don't ask questions about donations, Mr. Luca. I just process them." The accountant's expression softened slightly. "Someone wanted to make sure you received care. That's all I know." After she left, Hudson lay in stunned silence. Shame and gratitude crashed over him in waves that left him breathless. Lainey had paid his medical bills. The woman he'd abandoned, the wife he'd divorced while she was dying, had used her foundation, built from the ruins of what he'd thrown away, to save him from the same fate he'd left her to face. Hudson turned his face to the wall and wept. Not the desperate, breaking sobs from the empty mansion, but quiet tears of profound shame. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve her mercy, but she'd given it anyway. 2 days later, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, Hudson dozed fitfully when he heard soft footsteps in his doorway. He assumed it was a nurse and didn't open his eyes. Then a familiar voice, gentle and cautious, spoke. "Hello, Hudson." His eyes flew open. Lainey stood in the doorway, wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked healthy, real, nothing like the glamorous figure from the gala or the broken woman from his memories. She looked like the Lainey he'd first fallen in love with, before success and sickness had changed everything. "Why did you come?" Hudson's voice came out as a rasp. Lainey moved into the room slowly, carefully, as if approaching something fragile. "Because I know what it's like to be left alone when you're sick." She pulled a chair closer to his bed, the same chair he'd refused to sit in when he'd brought her divorce papers, the chair that had remained empty through all her suffering. Now she sat in it, meeting his eyes with a calm, steady gaze that held no anger, no bitterness, just a deep, weary understanding. "You didn't have to pay my bills," Hudson said. "No, I didn't." Lainey folded her hands in her lap. "But I couldn't let you go through what I went through, not when I had the power to help. Even after everything I did to you, especially because of what you did to me." Lainey's voice was soft but firm. "I learned something in this hospital, Hudson. Holding on to anger just makes you sick in different ways. I forgave you long ago." Hudson's hands trembled on the blanket. "How? How could you forgive me?" "Because forgiveness isn't about you, it's about me. It means I'm free to move forward without carrying the weight of what you did. But I left you. I threw you away when—" "I know what you did, Hudson. I was there." Lainey's eyes were clear, honest. "And for a long time, I wondered what was wrong with me, why I wasn't worth staying for, why my love wasn't enough." Hudson's chest ached. "Lainey, but I learned that it was never about my worth. It was about your fear. You couldn't handle seeing me weak because it forced you to face your own weaknesses. Easier to leave than to be vulnerable." The words cut through Hudson's defenses like a blade. She wasn't trying to wound him, she was simply telling the truth he'd been too cowardly to face. "I'm sorry," Hudson whispered. "God, Lainey, I'm so sorry. I know it's too late, but I need you to know. I know you're sorry." Lainey reached out and briefly touched his hand, a gesture of comfort, not romance. "And I accept your apology. But Hudson, forgiveness doesn't mean we go back. It means I'm free to move forward. Do you understand the difference?" Hudson nodded, tears streaming down his face. He understood perfectly. She'd forgiven him, but she was done with him. The door he'd slammed shut couldn't be reopened. Not now. Not ever. "I built something from what you threw away," Lainey continued quietly. "Something that helps people. Something that matters. And I did it not to spite you, but because I needed to prove to myself that being abandoned didn't mean I was worthless." "You were never worthless," Hudson choked out. "I was just too blind to see. I know that now, but I needed to discover it myself." Lainey stood, smoothing her jeans. "I should go. Richard is waiting." "Your husband?" "Yes," Lainey smiled softly. "My husband. He's a good man, Hudson. He sees strength where you saw weakness, partnership where you saw burden." Hudson looked at her, really looked at her, and saw what he'd lost. Not just a wife, but a partner. A person who'd loved him completely and been willing to sacrifice everything for his dreams. And he'd thrown it away because her suffering made him uncomfortable. "Why did you really come here?" Hudson asked. "The truth." Lainey paused at the door, considering. "Because I needed to see for myself that you're human, that you're capable of suffering and needing help. For months, I made you into a villain in my mind. But villains aren't real. They're just broken people making terrible choices. I don't deserve your kindness." "No," Lainey agreed. "You don't. But I'm not doing this for you, Hudson. I'm doing it because it's who I choose to be. The person who was abandoned taught me to never abandon others, even when they don't deserve mercy." She turned to leave, then looked back one final time. "It's not too late for you to become someone better," she said gently. "Just too late for us." Hudson watched her walk away, her footsteps fading down the corridor. Through his doorway, he glimpsed Dr. Ellis waiting in the hallway, his expression neither hostile nor welcoming, simply protective of the woman he loved. Lainey reached him, and Dr. Ellis took her hand naturally, like it was the most normal thing in the world. She looked up at him and smiled a real smile, full of affection and trust, and they walked away together. Hudson lay back against his pillows, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with his physical condition. She'd saved him, not to get him back, not to prove a point, not for gratitude or recognition. She'd saved him because that's who she'd become after he'd left someone who chose compassion over cruelty, even when cruelty would have been justified. Hudson stared at the ceiling tiles, finally understanding what real love looked like. It looked like sitting beside someone's hospital bed when they're dying. It looked like bringing coffee at midnight and whispering encouragement through doubt. It looked like forgiving someone who didn't deserve it because holding on to anger would poison your own healing. It looked like Lainey, and he'd had it all and thrown it away for an empire built on sand. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Outside his window, the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples. Somewhere in the hospital, nurses changed shifts and patients received care from Lainey's foundation. And Hudson Luca lay alone in his bed, saved by grace he'd never earned, finally understanding that some lessons can only be learned through losing everything you thought you wanted. He closed his eyes and whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Lainey, for being stronger than I ever was." The words hung in the air, heard by no one. But perhaps that was fitting. Some apologies aren't meant to be received. They're meant to mark the moment you finally understand what you've lost. 3 months after his hospital discharge, Hudson sat in a circle of plastic chairs in the hospital's community room, surrounded by strangers who were somehow becoming familiar. The support group met every Tuesday evening, people dealing with anxiety, depression, and the psychological aftermath of losing everything. "My name is Hudson," he said when his turn came, "and I'm learning that rebuilding is harder than building ever was." The facilitator, a kind woman named Dr. Chen, nodded encouragingly. "Tell us about your week, Hudson." "I volunteered 20 hours, mostly helping elderly patients get to physical therapy appointments, reading to people who can't hold books anymore. Small things." He paused. "I started seeing a therapist. That's new for me." "How does it feel?" someone asked. Hudson considered the question honestly. "Humbling, necessary. Like cleaning an infected wound, it hurts, but it's the only way to heal." After the meeting, Hudson walked the hospital corridors he'd come to know well. He stopped by room 314, where an elderly man named Frank was recovering from a stroke. Frank's family visited once a month, if that. "Evening, Frank," Hudson said, settling into the visitor's chair. "Want me to read more of that Western novel?" Frank's face lit up as much as his partial paralysis allowed. "You're back. Promised I would be, didn't I?" Hudson read for an hour, his voice filling the quiet room with stories of cowboys and frontier justice. When Frank dozed off, Hudson carefully marked the page and left the book on the bedside table. Grace, the night nurse who'd once cared for Lainey, caught him in the hallway. "You're here again," she observed. "Tuesday and Thursday evenings, Saturday mornings. Keeps me honest." Grace studied him with the same perceptive gaze she'd used on Lainey months ago. "You know, when Mrs. Luca was here, I prayed someone would sit with her the way you sit with Frank." Hudson's chest tightened. "I should have been that person." "Yes," Grace agreed simply. "You should have. But you're being that person for Frank now. That counts for something." "Does it?" "It's a start." Grace touched his shoulder briefly. "Healing isn't just about the body, Mr. Luca. Sometimes it's about learning who you want to become." That night, Hudson returned to his studio apartment, a far cry from the mansion. The space was tiny. A bed, a desk, a kitchenette, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it was clean, paid for with his modest job at a property management company, and it was his. Hudson made instant ramen, ate it sitting on his bed, and turned on the small television he'd bought secondhand. The evening news was on. He almost changed the channel, but then he heard the reporter's voice. "And today marks the grand opening of the Ellis Recovery Center, a groundbreaking facility for chronically ill patients who lack family support." Hudson's hand froze on the remote. The screen showed his former mansion, the gleaming white structure he'd been so proud of transformed. The ostentatious decorations were gone, replaced with accessible ramps, wide doorways, and a warm, welcoming entrance. Lainey stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, scissors in hand, Dr. Ellis beside her. She wore a simple green dress, and her smile was radiant. "This center represents hope," Lainey told the reporter. "No one should face illness alone. No one should be made to feel disposable when they need care most." The camera panned to show patients being welcomed into the facility. Nurses and volunteers helping people with walkers, wheelchairs, oxygen tanks. The same marble floors Hudson had once walked across in designer shoes now supported people who needed support most. A plaque near the entrance was shown in close-up. The Ellis Recovery Center, built from what was broken for those the world forgot. Hudson watched as Lainey gave a tour, showing reporters the rehabilitation gym, the communal dining areas, the private rooms designed for dignity and comfort. Dr. Ellis walked beside her, occasionally adding medical context, but mostly just supporting her with quiet pride. "The funding comes from repurposed properties," Lainey explained to a reporter. "Assets that were once symbols of excess are now providing essential care. It feels like justice, in a way." "And your ex-husband?" the reporter asked boldly. "Hudson Luca. Does he know his former mansion is now?" "This isn't about him," Lainey interrupted gently but firmly. "This is about the people we're helping. The past is the past. We're focused on the future." The interview continued, but Hudson barely heard it. He stared at the screen, watching Lainey help an elderly woman into a comfortable chair, watching Dr. Ellis check on a patient's medication, watching the mansion he'd filled with emptiness become full of purpose. Tears blurred his vision, but this time they weren't tears of self-pity. They were something else. Gratitude, maybe, or awe at what Lainey had built from the ruins he'd left behind. He turned off the television and sat in the quiet apartment, letting the weight of what he'd seen settle over him. 6 months later, Hudson had established a routine. Wake at 6 a.m., work his property management job from 8 to 5, volunteer at the hospital 3 evenings a week, therapy on Wednesdays, support group on Tuesdays. The structure kept him grounded, giving his days meaning beyond himself. He'd started reaching out to people he'd wronged. Some responded, many didn't. Marcus, his former business partner, agreed to meet for coffee. The conversation was stiff, awkward, but real. "I blamed you for things that weren't your fault," Hudson said. "The missing funds, the collapsed deals. Some of that was my blindness, not your failure. I'm sorry." Marcus stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "I appreciate that. But Hudson, I can't go back to working with you. I need you to understand that." "I know. I'm not asking you to. I just needed to say it." They parted cordially, not as friends but no longer as enemies. It was enough. Hudson wrote letters too. Long, detailed letters to Lainey that he never sent. Processing his regrets, his realizations, the lessons he was learning too late. He kept them in a box under his bed, not as messages meant to be received but as evidence of his own growth. "Dear Lainey, today I helped a man named Thomas walk to the bathroom. He cried because he felt ashamed to need help. I told him there's no shame in being human. I finally understand what you tried to teach me. Dear Lainey, my therapist asked what I'm most ashamed of. I told her it wasn't losing my empire. It was the moment I saw fear in your eyes when I brought those divorce papers, and I felt only relief. That's the moment I became someone I hope I never am again." The letters piled up, a chronicle of slow transformation. One Saturday morning in early spring, Hudson volunteered at a medical supply drive downtown. The event was organized by several local hospitals and health foundations, collecting wheelchairs, walkers, oxygen equipment, and other supplies for patients in need. Hudson helped unload trucks, sort donations, and organize the warehouse space. He was carrying a box of blood pressure monitors when he heard a familiar voice giving directions nearby. "The wheelchairs go in Section C. Make sure we log each one we need, accurate inventory." Hudson turned slowly. Lainey stood near the loading dock, clipboard in hand, coordinating a team of volunteers. She wore jeans, sneakers, and an Ellis Foundation t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked focused, purposeful, completely in her element. Their eyes met across the warehouse. For a moment, neither moved. Then Lainey offered a small, professional smile and continued her work. Hudson returned to his own tasks, hyper-aware of her presence in the space. They moved around each other for the next hour, working side by side but not together. Hudson unloaded supplies. Lainey organized inventory. Sometimes they worked at the same table, checking items off lists, their proximity both comfortable and strange. Finally, during a water break, they found themselves alone near the loading dock. "Hudson," Lainey said simply. A statement, not a question. "Lainey," he fumbled with his water bottle. "I didn't know you'd be here. The foundation partners with several organizations. We try to attend most supply drives." She studied him curiously. "You volunteer here?" "When I can. Weekends mostly." Lainey nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps recognition. "That's good," she said. "Important work." "Thank you." Hudson's voice came out rough. "For what you did. At the hospital. The bills. I never properly thanked you, and I didn't deserve." "It wasn't about deserving," Lainey interrupted gently. "It was about doing what's right." They stood in silence for a moment, the warehouse bustling around them, years of history hanging unspoken between them. "You look healthy," Hudson ventured. "I am. Finally." Lainey glanced at him, really looked at him. "You look different too." "Different how?" "Die. Quieter. Like you're carrying less weight, even though you probably have less to carry." Hudson laughed, a short, surprised sound. "That's surprisingly accurate. I heard you've been volunteering at Street Mary's." Grace mentioned it. "Grace talks too much," Hudson said, but without heat. "She likes you. Says you're patient with the difficult patients, that you sit with people no one else wants to sit with." Hudson looked down at his scuffed work boots, embarrassed. "It's the least I can do." "No," Lainey said thoughtfully. "The least you could do would be nothing. This is more than that." A volunteer called Lainey's name from across the warehouse. She raised her hand in acknowledgement. "I should go," she said. Lainey Hudson stopped, unsure what he wanted to say. She waited, patient. "I'm glad you're happy, that you found someone who sees your worth. I mean that." Lainey's expression softened. "Thank you, Hudson. I believe you do." She turned to leave, then paused. "You're doing good work. Keep doing it. Not for redemption or forgiveness, but because it's who you're choosing to become." Then she walked away, back to her clipboard and her purpose and her life that no longer included him. Hudson watched her go, feeling something he couldn't quite name. Not loss, exactly, not closure either, but perhaps acceptance. He'd been married to Lainey for 8 years. He'd loved her, failed her, lost her, and finally understood her. And now they were strangers who happened to care about the same things, working parallel paths that would occasionally intersect but never merge again. It wasn't the ending he would have written months ago, but it was honest, real, and somehow, that made it right. Hudson picked up another box of supplies and returned to work. 1 year after his breakdown, Hudson sat at his small kitchen table sorting through mail. Bills mostly, a few advertisements. Then an official-looking envelope with a law firm's return address. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. After everything that had happened, legal documents still triggered a wave of anxiety. Inside were property transfer records and a formal notification. Notice of asset acquisition. The Ellis Recovery Foundation has completed legal acquisition of the following properties previously registered under Hudson Luca and Lainey M. Luca, 1247 Riverside Drive, residential, 890 Commerce Street, commercial, 456 Highland Avenue, residential. The list went on. Properties Hudson had forgotten existed, all legally registered in both their names, all now officially transferred to Lainey's foundation. The final line read, "All acquisitions completed through proper legal channels. No further action required from Mr. Hudson Luca." Hudson set the papers down carefully, his throat tight. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. Lainey had taken what was legally hers and transformed it into something meaningful. The notification included an invitation. "You are cordially invited to the official dedication ceremony of the Ellis Recovery Center, formerly the Luca estate. The ceremony will celebrate the transformation of this property into a comprehensive care facility for chronically ill patients. Saturday, May 15th, 2 p.m. Hudson stared at the invitation for a long time. His former mansion, the symbol of everything he'd achieved and lost, was now officially a recovery center. Part of him wanted to throw the invitation away, to avoid the painful reminder of what he'd sacrificed. But another part of him, the part that had been slowly rebuilding over the past year, knew he needed to go, not to reclaim anything, not to seek recognition, but to witness the final transformation of his past into something better than it had ever been. He marked the date on his calendar. Saturday, May 15th, arrived warm and bright. Hudson took the bus to his former neighborhood, unable to afford the car he'd once driven. The route took him through streets he used to know intimately, past restaurants where he'd entertained clients, past the building where his office had been. Everything looked different now. Smaller somehow, less impressive than he remembered. When he got off at his old stop, he almost didn't recognize the mansion. The ostentatious gates had been replaced with accessible entrances. The pristine, untouchable lawn now featured walking paths, garden benches, and spaces designed for patients to sit outside safely. A crowd had gathered for the dedication ceremony. News cameras, local politicians, medical professionals, families of patients. Hudson stayed at the back, anonymous in his simple clothes and baseball cap. No one recognized him. He was just another face in the crowd, and that was exactly what he wanted. The ceremony began with several speakers: the mayor, a hospital administrator, a representative from the state health department. They all praised the Ellis Foundation's work, the vision behind the center, the lives that would be changed. Then Dr. Richard Ellis took the microphone. "My wife asked me what I should say today," he began, his voice warm and genuine. "And I told her the truth, that this building represents everything I've learned about healing. Not just physical healing, but the healing that comes from being seen, valued, and cared for when you're most vulnerable." The crowd applauded. Hudson stood very still, watching. "This center exists because my wife understands something profound, that our worst experiences can become our greatest teachers. That pain can be transformed into purpose. That what breaks us can also make us capable of healing others." Dr. Ellis gestured toward the entrance, where a large bronze plaque had been mounted beside the doors. "I'll let Lainey speak for herself now. My wife and the founder of this foundation, Dr. Lainey Ellis." Lainey stepped to the microphone, and Hudson's breath caught in his chest. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked healthy, confident, and utterly at peace. The transformation from the dying woman in the hospital bed to this poised, purposeful person was almost incomprehensible. "Thank you all for being here," Lainey began. "This building has a complicated history. It was once a symbol of excess, of success measured by square footage and marble floors. Today, it becomes something different, a symbol of second chances." Hudson's hands gripped the brim of his baseball cap tightly. "I won't pretend that creating this center was easy, or that it came from a place of pure altruism. When I was sick and abandoned, I was angry, broken. I wanted the world to acknowledge my pain, to punish the people who'd hurt me." The crowd was silent, hanging on her words. "But anger is exhausting, and revenge doesn't heal anything, it just creates more wounds." Lainey's voice was steady, clear. "So instead I asked myself, what would healing actually look like? Not for me alone, but for everyone who's experienced what I experienced." She gestured to the building behind her. "This is the answer I found. A place where people who feel disposable can be reminded of their worth, where chronic illness doesn't mean abandonment, where families who can't cope aren't judged, but where patients still receive dignified care." Lainey paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. For just a moment, Hudson thought her gaze landed on him, but then it moved on. "Transformation isn't easy," Lainey continued. "Turning pain into purpose requires you to face everything that hurt you and choose to build something better anyway. It requires you to forgive not because people deserve it, but because you deserve peace." Hudson felt tears running down his face. He didn't wipe them away. "This center is named for what it represents: recovery. Not just physical recovery, but emotional, spiritual recovery. The recovery of hope, of dignity, of the belief that even when everything falls apart, something new and beautiful can grow from the ruins. The crowd applauded, many people wiping their own tears. "I want to thank everyone who made this possible," Lainey said. "The doctors, nurses, volunteers, donors, and especially the patients who trusted us with their care. You remind me every day why this matters." She took a deep breath, composing herself. "There's a quote that guided me through my darkest days. The wound is the place where the light enters you. This building, this center, this mission, they're all proof that wounds can become windows, that what breaks us can let the light in." Lainey stepped back from the microphone, and Dr. Ellis joined her. Together, they pulled a ribbon, and the crowd cheered as the doors officially opened. Hudson watched from the back as patients and families began touring the facility. He saw Martha, the elderly woman Lainey had befriended in the hospital, being wheeled through the entrance with tears of joy on her face. He saw nurses showing families the private rooms, the rehabilitation gym, the communal spaces designed for connection and healing. And he saw Lainey moving through the crowd, greeting each person individually, listening to their stories, holding hands, offering hope. Hudson walked slowly toward the entrance, drawn by something he couldn't name. He stood before the bronze plaque mounted beside the doors, reading the words etched into metal. "The Ellis Recovery Center, built from what was broken for those the world forgot. May all who enter find healing, dignity, and hope." Below that, in smaller letters, "Funded by the Ellis Foundation, established 2024, dedicated to providing care for chronically ill patients without family support." Hudson reached out and traced the words with his fingers. His former mansion, his former life, his former wife. All transformed into something he never could have built, not because he lacked the resources, but because he lacked the vision. "You won, Lainey," he whispered to the plaque, tears streaming freely now. "Not against me, but for both of us." Because she had won. Not in defeating him, but in becoming someone capable of grace he'd never shown her. In taking what he'd thrown away and making it matter. A young volunteer approached him. "Sir, are you all right?" Hudson wiped his eyes, nodded. "Yes, just moved by what this represents. It's pretty special, isn't it?" The volunteer smiled. "Dr. Ellis, the founder, she actually lived through what these patients are experiencing. She knows what it's like." "I know," Hudson said quietly. "I know she does." He took one last look at the building, the marble steps he'd once climbed, with arrogance now climbed by people who needed support. The doors he'd once walked through to parties and empty celebrations, now open to provide real refuge. Then Hudson turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could recognize him. That evening, Hudson sat at his small desk in his studio apartment. He opened the journal his therapist had encouraged him to keep, a simple notebook filled with his thoughts, reflections, and the slow documentation of his transformation. He picked up his pen and wrote, "May 15th, 1 year after everything fell apart. Today I stood in front of my former mansion and watched it become something I never could have made it. A place of actual value. A place that helps instead of impresses. I learned what love is by losing it. Real love, the kind Lainey showed me. Not in staying with me, but in refusing to let my abandonment turn her cruel. The kind she showed me in paying my hospital bills when she had every right to let me suffer as she had. I learned what strength is by watching someone I thought was weak. Lainey was never weak. Her gentleness was strength. Her forgiveness was strength. Her ability to transform pain into purpose was a strength I'll never fully understand. I learned that wealth is nothing if you're poor in character. I had millions of dollars in a mansion and magazine covers, and I was the poorest man alive. Now I have a studio apartment and a modest job and volunteer work that doesn't pay anything, and I'm richer than I ever was. Redemption isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about becoming worthy of what you had. I'll never get Lainey back. I'll never rebuild my empire. But maybe I can become someone who wouldn't make those same mistakes again. Maybe that's enough." Hudson set down his pen and looked around his small apartment. The cracked wedding photo sat on his desk, never thrown away, a reminder of who he'd been and who he'd lost. Beside it sat his volunteer schedule for the week: 3 evenings at the hospital, Saturday morning at the homeless shelter, Tuesday evening at the support group. His phone buzzed. A text from Grace, the nurse. Frank is asking for you. Said you promised to finish that Western novel. Are you coming Thursday? Hudson smiled and typed back, I'll be there. The final scene unfolded in parallel. Two lives that had once been intertwined now moving forward separately but somehow still connected. At the Ellis Recovery Center, Lainey walked through the facility with Dr. Ellis, checking on patients, greeting families, ensuring everything ran smoothly. She stopped in Martha's room, sitting beside the bed, and holding the elderly woman's hand while she told stories about her grandchildren. You look happy, dear, Martha observed. Lainey smiled. I am. Finally. Because of this place? Because of what it represents. Proof that the worst thing that ever happened to me wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Dr. Ellis appeared in the doorway, watching his wife with quiet pride. Lainey saw him and smiled, and he smiled back, a moment of connection that needed no words. They had built something beautiful together. Not just the center, but a life based on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and the understanding that true strength was found in vulnerability, not in pretending to be invincible. At the homeless shelter across town, Hudson served dinner to a line of people society had forgotten. He listened to their stories, treated them with dignity, and never once mentioned who he used to be or what he used to have. An older man named James finished his meal and lingered. You're good at this, he said. Most volunteers treat us like charity cases. You treat us like people. Because you are people, Hudson said simply. That's all any of us are. Just people trying to get through. James studied him curiously. You got a story, son. I can tell. Everyone has a story, Hudson replied, clearing plates. Mine just taught me some hard lessons. The hardest lessons are usually the most important ones, James said, then wandered off to find a bed for the night. Hudson cleaned up after the dinner service, locked the shelter doors, and walked home through streets he was learning to navigate without a car. The city looked different at eye level, from buses and sidewalks instead of from penthouse windows and luxury sedans. Different, but somehow more real. Back in his apartment, Hudson looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He looked older than he had 2 years ago, thinner, more tired, but also, somehow, more alive. The final voiceover played in his mind like a prayer. Some people teach you how to love by loving you. Others teach you by showing you what love looks like after you've destroyed it. Lainey taught me both. She loved me when I didn't deserve it. Then she showed me what it meant to love with grace, with boundaries, with the understanding that forgiveness doesn't require you to accept mistreatment. She taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up and choosing to become someone better than who you were before you fell. And maybe that was the greatest gift she ever gave me. Not her forgiveness, though I didn't earn it. Not her mercy, though I desperately needed it. But the example of what it means to turn pain into purpose, wounds into windows, and broken things into something beautiful. I'll never get her back. I'll never rebuild what I lost. But maybe, slowly, quietly, through service and humility, and the small acts of showing up for people who need someone to show up, maybe I can become worthy of the love she once gave me, even if I never receive it again. Hudson turned off the light and lay down on his simple bed, peace settling over him like a blanket. Across town, Lainey fell asleep beside her husband, dreaming of the patients they would help, the lives they would change, the purpose she'd found in her darkest hour. Two lives, two paths, once intertwined, now separate, both moving forward into futures shaped by the past, but not defined by it. And somewhere between them, in hospital rooms and homeless shelters and recovery centers, the ripples of both their stories continued teaching others about resilience, about grace, about the possibility of transformation even when everything falls apart. The story was finished, but the lessons would last forever. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you made it this far, you're part of the real community, so make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Drop a comment, like, and let me know what you think and what you want to see next. I read every single one. Until next time, stay relaxed, stay present, stay kind to yourself.